The Mandalorian broke a lot of its patterns in Chapter 14, The Tragedy, and I mean that in a very good way. The season has been alternating between what have felt like main and side quests every episode, and most of those episodes have also basically had Din show up somewhere to help somebody before they help him. And all of that is fine. I haven't felt like the show has been repetitive or anything, but after last week, we were all wondering if Din and Grogu would get to Tython right away, or would there be a pit stop, and we just dive right into Tython in a short but action-packed episode full of unexpected plot developments with some returning characters, questions answered, new questions raised. It was great. But we start on the Razor Crest with an adorable and very necessary scene considering what's to come. Din is literally just having fun saying Grogu's name and watching him react by making that adorable noise, and he laughs. That alone took me completely by surprise. I can't recall hearing him laugh before. And then he takes the ball and starts playing a little game of catch. That quickly turns sad because Din starts going on about Tython and finding a Jedi to train him, so he's obviously still seeing that as his quest, and that's no surprise. But I really get the sense that Din is trying to convince himself that it's the right thing to do. He's saying Grogu is too powerful for him to train, which is funny considering the armorer called the child too weak at the end of Season 1. We're inching closer and closer to this point where Din might have to say goodbye to Grogu, but we're also seeing him acting the most like a father he ever has. I think it would be really nice if at the end of this season he stops treating the child like a mission and instead starts actually and purposefully treating him like a son. But we get to Tython and the Seeing Stone all without conflict. He plops Grogu down and nothing happens until he places his hand down and reaches out. It's very similar to the stone Rey and Luke use on Ahch-To. There is debate over which Jedi temple was the first, and Tython is in the running, but I wonder if maybe all of them began around the same time, and these stones were used as like communication devices between them all. Kinda like the Palantirs in Lord of the Rings, the Tython temple even kind of reminds me of Weathertop, where a Palantir was once kept, but I'm crossing my fandoms. Unfortunately, once Grogu is taken out of commission by using the Force, trouble shows up in the form of the Slave Freaking One. And of course, it's piloted by none other than Boba Freaking Fett, who's got Fennec Shand with him. I am very relieved to have that character back, even if it means I have officially lost the Fett bet about whether or not Boba would appear in Season 1 of the show, and even if it's a little silly that she just has a mechanical stomach now, but it's a Star Wars brand of silly, so I'm on board. But boy does this raise a lot of questions. He claims to have been tracking Din, and he wants his armor back, and he even mentions Cobb Vanth by name. So why didn't he take the armor back before? It sure seems like he could have. Was he stuck on Tatooine this whole time, or was he traveling the galaxy because he has his ship? And while we're at it, let's address the "is he a Mandalorian" question, because that's been up for debate for years at this point. Back in Season 2 of The Clone Wars, the Prime Minister of Mandalore claimed Jango Fett was no Mandalorian and confused fans everywhere. The special features for that season also make it pretty clear that George Lucas and even Dave Filoni did not consider them to be Mandalorian. But this episode is doing a lot of backpedaling on that. I don't mind it. Honestly, I'm glad to have this debate put to rest because it's something I myself have been going back and forth on. Boba was the original Mandalorian to me and a lot of fans, and to have that taken away in the Clone Wars was odd. And I feel like it took me years to accept that, and now they're like, nah, never mind, they're Mandalorian foundlings, so I'm just over here laughing. But most of the people watching this series probably haven't seen the Clone Wars and have no idea any of this was ever a question. And again, I think what we're presented here in The Mandalorian makes sense with what we saw in the Clone Wars. The Prime Minister is basically looking down his nose at some foundlings and saying they're not real Mandalorians, and that lines up so well with one of the central themes of this show. What does it mean to be a Mandalorian? On top of that, now that I think about it, maybe foundlings are part of the quote, old ways. Maybe it's something only some sects of Mandalorians do, like Death Watch. And maybe the Mandalorian Civil Wars, which Fett mentions, were about more than wanting to remain warriors over pacifists. Maybe some Mandalorians were fighting for the right to be recognized by their own people. Like I said, a lot of questions pop up from Boba Fett being back, but they're all good and interesting, and I'm sure we'll get the answers over time. On top of that, Fett himself has a lot to explore regarding fatherhood that I think would be cool for him and Din to discuss at some point. Anyway, Fett and Shan's conversation is cut short by the arrival of the Empire, and they all work together to fight them off and defend Grogu while he meditates. This is the most we get to actually see Boba do in live action, so that might go a long way with the Boba Fett is overrated crowd. He can hold his own against multiple stormtroopers without his armor, but then he gets his back, and yes. Of course, I was thrilled to see him fighting side by side with Din, and there's just something wonderful about hearing Morrison's voice coming out of that helmet again. It's hard for me to even imagine the original voice they used in The Empire Strikes Back anymore. Morrison is Jango and Boba. I really liked the progression of the fight against the Empire as well. A few stormtroopers show up and Finnick and Fett handle them without much problem. Okay, fine, here are more stormtroopers. And then they get a little overwhelmed until Din shows up. And then more, and then Fett gets his armor. But we all know the Dark Troopers are coming. Gideon calls them by name, which is awesome, and then they simply swoop in and grab Grogu after he finishes reaching out with the Force. I do wish we got to see some fighting against the Dark Troopers because I have this sense that it would not have gone well, but the slow buildup of their threat is also very fun. I still have a sneaking suspicion that they're made out of Beskar, which would make them even more difficult to take down, and they can fly, so they could be kind of like this evil mirror image of Mandalorians, flying Beskar-plated fighting machines. So Grogu is gone, which didn't surprise me all that much. I kind of thought exactly this would happen, following a similar model as Season 1, and again we're going to assemble the crew to save him. What I did not expect at all was the Razor Crest's destruction. I gasped when that happened. This would already be a low point for Din, but you took his ship too? He just got it fixed. In this moment, I think the ship represents his quest and relationship with Grogu, but he finds the ball in the wreckage, therefore finding hope that he will get his tiny green son back. I love how simple yet powerful of an image that little ball has become ever since Chapter 3. Din also finds the Beskar spear, and I'm just jonesing for him to fight Gideon with the Darksaber now. Fortunately, he's got to ride off the planet because Boba Fett basically says he's honor-bound to help him get Grogu back. I will say, and this is a big ol' nitpick here, it's not bothering me all that much, but Fett in this episode is very different from the Fett we've seen in the comics that show him in his prime. They have very much been presenting him as a bad guy in the comic world whose only code revolves around himself. But that was before the Sarlacc pit, that was over 5 years ago, whatever he's been through has changed him, and I am totally up to believe that. It just surprised me because I didn't expect a Fett team-up, but I am absolutely here for it. So they head to Navarro to get information on Mayfeld, which I am absolutely less here for. I just had a, really? Him? Reaction. I wasn't the biggest fan of the Prisoner episode and mainly that very over-the-top crew, but whatever, he's a wild card on this adventure that can cause a lot of problems, so if nothing else, his inclusion will make things interesting. I assume Kara and Greef will come with them, maybe we'll pick up Bo-Katan, Reeves, Woves, Ahsoka, and of course Frog Lady too. Kidding on that last one, but I think the next chapter will be about assembling a big old team to take on Gideon and his Dark Troopers, so they're gonna need all the help they can get. I do get the sense that Ahsoka's appearance was a one-off, and if that's the case, it'll be interesting to see why they don't get the Jedi. If they pick up Bo-Katan, she could probably just say Ahsoka went off to find a friend or something vague like that. The final scene takes us to Gideon's cruiser, where Grogu is held captive, but not helpless. He's tossing stormtroopers around like ragdolls, and definitely tapping into the dark side here. I figured that part of him would come back out this season, and I didn't want to gloss over it just because he's force-choking stormtroopers. Using the Force for attack is 100% dark side stuff. I still worry something even worse is going to happen with that in the next 2 episodes. We also see a new side of Gideon as he confronts the baby. Like, even he gets a little bit giddy in front of it. Obviously it's because he has plans for Grogu, but his attitude was very playful and interesting. But that's it for Chapter 14, The Tragedy. It was short, but still so engaging. It answered questions, but raised some new ones without feeling frustrating, except for the fact that it might be a while before we know what Grogu saw, or who he reached out to on Tython, or what happened there at all. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Maybe he'll find a way to communicate with Din through the Force, or maybe a new Jedi character will show up at the end of the season. I don't know. We're back to wait and see mode. So let me know what you thought of this episode and what you think will happen over the next 2 weeks in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all of our Mandalorian coverage, follow us on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out our Patreon page where we're releasing audio commentaries for all these new episodes. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.